What in the world is a bond market? Economists talk about this all the time. Newspapers talk about bond markets and interest rates all the time. It's important to understand what's going on here, both for an economics class, but also in your everyday life. So we're going to talk in this video about how bond markets and interest rates interact with each other. And the most important thing to know, first off, about what a bond is, it's a way for someone to borrow money. Someone who issues a bond is borrowing money, is borrowing funds. They need funds right now. They say to someone, I will give you this piece of paper, my bond to you. I will bind myself to pay you an interest rate, an amount of money for the use of your money, and at the end of some predetermined period, I will give you your money back, your principal back. So there are two concepts here. One is the principal, that's the amount of the money that's being borrowed, and then the interest payment based on the interest rate is how much the borrower will pay the lender for the use of those funds. So it's a way to get borrowers and lenders together through this guarantee repayment, unless you default. But let's kind of set that aside. So when someone issues a bond, for example, a local school district, they are putting out pieces of paper that says they will pay interest so that they can use the money today to build a school. Or a state will issue bonds for a new highway. A corporation may issue bonds in order to expand production. A government may issue bonds in order to cover a shortfall in tax revenues. So there are all sorts of different places in which the bond market will take place, the private sector, public sector, and so forth. But it has this essential component of relating borrowers to lenders through the payment of an interest rate. So let's be concrete about this. And let's say in year one, okay, you've got some borrower who wants to get $100. Okay, they're trying to buy $100, and they say they will pay a 5% interest rate on the use of these funds for 1 year. You've got, I'm going to call this borrower number one. You've got a lender, someone who has $100, who was considering this deal, and they say, okay, I'll let you have the $100 today. You give me $105 at the end of the period. Okay, so at the end of year two, this lender will have $105. It's the principal plus the interest payment, which we write generally as 1 plus the interest rate. Okay? So this may be a deal that the lender is interested in taking up the borrower. Let's say they do that. So again, the borrower gets to use the money, the lender gets the piece of paper, and a payment at the end of the year based on this interest payment. Okay? Straightforward. Now, what I want to do now is talk about what will happen to this situation if a new borrower comes in. A new borrower who was willing to offer a higher interest rate. So what we're doing here is that we're looking at what happens to someone who has a current bond in their hands, and suddenly what other people are willing to pay goes up. The interest rate rises. And what we're going to see is that there's an inverse relationship between bond prices, what a bond is worth, and interest rates. If interest rates go up, price of bonds goes down. If interest rates fall, the price of bonds goes up. So a bond price is not the same thing as an interest rate. The bond price is what you pay for the piece of paper. In this original example, the lender paid $100. Okay, they gave $100 for the piece of paper to get this interest rate. So let's imagine that we've got another borrower number 2, who is also trying to get $100 from the lender, and they are now willing to pay 10%. They're trying to attract the $100. So they're trying to, get these funds instead of this borrower. Okay, we have a new borrower out there who is making their bond more attractive. Okay, their interest rate is 10% to borrow the $100. Now, the lender, seeing this, figures, I'd rather have the 10%. I'd rather get $110 rather than $105. Okay? So as the interest rates goes up, what happens to borrower number 1? Now let's say they've already printed up the bond. The bond says, I'm going to pay you 5%. And there's a face value. Okay. Okay, that's the amount that's being borrowed. They've got this fixed interest rate of 5%. Well, there's no way that borrower number 1 is going to attract anybody to loan them the $100 at 5%, when alternatively they could, the lender could get 10% for the same loan. So what does that do to the price of this bond? They're going to have to discount it. They're going to have to lower their price from $100 down to something substantially lower in order to attract the lender. So I'm not going to figure out the specific number, because that's not really going to be the role that this plays in any courses that you might take. But instead, what you need to know is that as the interest rates go up, the price of existing bonds falls. Okay, this bond is, it's printed, it's ready to go. It's got $100, 5%. They can't sell that bond for $100. They can't raise $100 if they're only paying 5% of interest. The price of that existing bond will fall. It will have to be sold at a discount if the new borrower shows up paying a higher interest rate. So what you see is if the interest rate goes up, the price of bonds falls. Okay? Now, let's say instead that the market conditions were such that the new guy shows up and they offer only 3%. So the new people in the market are putting this out there for $100 at 3%. You've got this existing bond worth $100 face value, 5% interest rate. If this is the new going interest rate, if interest rates have fallen, then anybody that has this piece of paper is going to see its value increase. So if the interest rates fall, then the price of existing bonds will increase. They will sell at a premium. Now, what's really important for the classes that you're going to be taking is that you understand that these relative prices, or these prices for bonds and interest rates, go in opposite directions. Okay, so that's really the critical thing. And let me give you one more context for this in terms of government borrowing. Let's say that for whatever reason, there's massive new government borrowing. It doesn't have to be government, it could actually be new corporate borrowing. It doesn't really matter, but let's use an example with government borrowing. You have a whole bunch of new borrowers, a large value of borrowing that's now taking place. So you have more borrowing, more bonds in the marketplace. The government coming out and saying, here, we need to borrow money. We're going to pay an interest rate. Lots and lots of borrowing, lots and lots of issuance of new debt, new pieces of paper, new bonds, new treasuries, it's called in the United States. So this is increasing the supply of bonds. You have new pieces of paper being issued to try and borrow money. If the supply of anything goes up, the price tends to fall. Okay? Simple supply and demand. The more bonds that you have, the lower the price of bonds. What does that mean to interest rates? It means that interest rates are going to have to rise. Okay? If the price of bonds goes down, the interest rates go up. Here's another way to think about that. You've got a bunch of new borrowers, or one large borrower. In order to attract the limited amount of lenders' money, they've got to attract them. They've got to say, hey, look at me, give me the money. Loan the money to me. They have to raise the interest rate. And that tends to have spillover effects onto other interest rates in the economy. Now I would say, this is holding everything else fixed, so that, if there's more borrowing for bonds, that will generally make interest rates higher than they might otherwise be. There are a lot of other things that could be going on. So you might see more borrowing and interest rates may be flat if there's something else going on. So for example, if the amount of savings was increasing, and so you had sufficient savings to meet this new borrowing, you wouldn't necessarily see the interest rate. So it's a complicated relationship, but all things equal, more borrowing leads to higher interest rates. And price of bonds going up, interest rates going down, price of bonds going down, interest rates go up. So very critical concept in macroeconomics and in finance generally.